Please pray with me. More of you, O Christ, less of me. More of you, O Christ, less of me. More of you, O Christ, less of me. May the words of my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts draw us closer to, O God, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. We read this at my ordination because, as my friend Phil Porter pointed out in the sermon at my ordination, this makes a great bumper sticker. And if you've got a really complicated ministry, having some bumper stickers you can count on really help. The time I was headed into ministry with women and families infected and affected by HIV and AIDS, and it was a complicated time. I know that it's easy for us sometimes to think, wow, can you believe how horrible the times are we're living in? But depending on who you are, trust me, being an out lesbian in the 80s in Southern Virginia was no fun. So depending on who you are, it's always been hard, depending on who you are. And it's important to know that when you think about who is my neighbor. Who is my neighbor? Well, a lot of progressive folks would simply say my neighbor is the neighbor in need, or the person right in front of me, the person closest in proximity. And certainly people who are close in proximity are going to immediately be of concern to us because we're going to see them. We're going to know a little bit about them. We're going to know what they need, and we can certainly do favors for them, and we can welcome them, and we can easily do that. But it helps to know that the Decalogue, of which Matthew is really quoting here, putting those quotes in Jesus' mouth, the Decalogue, the 10 Commandments, of which these are the first 2 commandments, and Jesus makes the bold statement that just these 2 commandments include everything in the law and everything else. If we really let that sink in, of course, the answer to who is my neighbor is everyone is your neighbor. There is no one who is not your neighbor. And that is trickier. That's a whole lot trickier. And it might help somebody's knocking at my door. Okay, I just won't even think about that. Oh, it's probably Matilde. Yeah, I'll mute her. Oh, she can't hear again. Can you hear now?
I can hear now.
Lord, okay. The tapping was interesting and made me think we had ghosts. Wow. You know what? When I started preaching, I didn't have all this. It was a lot easier. It was just you and me and a microphone. That was it. This is a lot more complicated. It's like meta more complicated. But it makes the example perfect. Our neighbor is also online. Our neighbor is also, clear across town. Our neighbor could be anywhere in South Sudan, in Ukraine, in Gaza, in Jerusalem, in Washington, D.C., in San Francisco, in a remote canyon in New Mexico, in you name the place. Our neighbors are on the Guadalupe River in Texas, and now the Llano is flooding. It's where my dad used to fish all the time. I know these rivers. I know those rivers so well. And so many of my friends went to camp there. I went to camp in New Mexico because, I've always been a New Mexico fan. But they all went to camp down on those rivers. I got lost for a second there. Let me get back to the neighbor and the Decalogue. So the Decalogue, also known as the Ten Commandments, is more fascinating than you might think in some ways. Walter Brueggemann, who just recently passed, great biblical scholar, UCC minister, activist to some degree in a very scholarly kind of way, author of many, many, many books that I promise you every progressive pastor owns at least 2 or 3, maybe 4 or 5, wrote a book recently, just before he died, maybe a year before he died, called In God We Do Not Trust. And he talked about the Ten Commandments as being the biblical response of the Hebrew people to the injustice of Pharaoh in Egypt. That you could easily make a decalogue of Pharaoh's rules. You can also, every system has its own 10 commandments. Every church I've ever served might not be living by the biblical 10 commandments. One of them might be, thou shalt not ever play in the garden on Easter. Or, every organization, every group of people has some unwritten commandments. And they're not always just. And they don't always match the Decalogue. And so Moses, when he brings the 10 Commandments to the Hebrew people, of which these 2 commandments are the first 2, is trying to help them learn how to live as if they have not been living in an unjust system. If you'll recall, through that whole story, they talk about how they'd just as soon go back to Egypt where it was all predictable. Right? They grumble, is the best translation of the Hebrew. They grumble. It's like, here we are out in the desert, and there's nothing really to eat except this manna and these quails. And, oh, by the way, do we really have to trust in this invisible God? And where is Moses? Where's our leader? He's like gone. Where is he? So, of course, they make a golden calf and they try to do what's familiar. And this is the thing about assumptions. We are so oriented towards familiarity. Doctors would call it homeostasis. Literally, our bodies kind of want things to be the same. They want you to eat about the same amount of calories. They want you to do the same amount of exercise. Don't push it too hard on any direction. Every health plan will tell you to find that happy balance. But guess what? This is not what these 2 commandments are talking about. Happy balance is, basically doing what we want to do, being good, being nice, welcoming people, doing favors for neighbors, especially the ones we like. I have to admit, we are very fortunate in our immediate neighborhood that we like most of our neighbors, but I know people who live in places where they don't like all their neighbors, and in fact, some of their neighbors are hostile, and loving your neighbor is difficult. Our friend Lila in Houston lives down the street from a sort of really horrible neighbor that she actually finds somewhat frightening, and he's also well-armed. So it's, how do you love that neighbor? That's the question, right? How do you love that neighbor? How do you love yourself and your family and your friends when things are bad? Like you're out in the middle of a desert and your leadership has disappeared and you don't know where you're going or what's going to happen next. How do you love your neighbor then? Might tempt you to go back to the familiar system, even though it was cruel and oppressive. Slavery in Egypt slavery is never good, but slavery in Egypt was particularly bad. Pharaoh's rules were, you shall make my bricks no matter what. Oh, and by the way, I'm not going to provide the straw. You have to get all the straw and still make as many as bricks. And then, oh, by the way, I'm not even going to let you gather the straw, but you have to make as many bricks. The noose tightens more and more in an oppressive set of commandments. But this Decalogue, you shall love God with your heart, soul, and mind, and your neighbor as yourself, is so wide. Really, as Jesus says, there's nothing more. Because, of course, you're not going to covet your neighbor's wife. You're not going to covet your neighbor's Lexus. You're not going to, steal. You're not going to murder. You're not going to do any of the things that are in the rest of the commandments if you love your neighbor as yourself. And, oh, by the way, if you love God as much as you love yourself and your neighbor. And all of us have trouble with all of these. All three of them. It's the journey of a lifetime to learn how to truly love ourselves, to love our neighbors both near and far, especially the neighbors who are hard to love. And what does it mean to love God? All of us have to figure that out. It might mean being in love with the creation. It might mean being in love with where you are right now, no matter what. It might mean learning to live even when things are hard. When he says, if you do this, then you shall live, this is often interpreted as eternal life. You will live forever after you're dead. I actually think it might be a little more literal. You will live your life right now in a way that feels like living, not like dying, not like holding your breath and praying and dreading and praying and dreading and praying and dreading. So my heart is with the monks today, but I'm also, just because I know them, I know how they're reacting to this. They might be afraid. They might be nervous. But their faith tells them that whether they live in that monastery or they wind up camping on the Chama, nothing really matters but the love of God and the love they have for each other. Their lives are pretty stripped down. They don't worry about all the things that we usually worry about. When I became an oblate, one of the brothers said to me, he said, I can't imagine trying to live the rule in the world. It's so much easier in the monastery, where everybody's at least on the same page, or vaguely on the same page. Because they've got a whole rule. They've got 73 chapters they've agreed on. What are our decalogues? What are your own rules for yourself about how we lean in to this kind of love? How do you coach yourself around being a good neighbor? It doesn't mean becoming a doormat, that's for sure, but it also means that we don't return evil for evil. That's one of Paul's rules. Never return evil for evil. I really try to live by that one. I can't always be nice, but I can try to not return evil for evil. I can try to be good and an example even when that's not what everyone else is doing. And mostly, and this is where meditation and prayer, I think, is the most helpful, is we have to be able to dive deep within and imagine another world is possible, as we say in the United Church of Christ. Imagine that another world is possible, that we do not have to be defined by nor oppressed by what's happening outside of us. We live as if another world is possible. And some days that is just wicked hard. That is wicked hard. I am not saying that this is a cakewalk. This is wicked hard. And yet there is great grace in living that way. It's great grace to think about, like the monks, if the fire comes, oh, okay, that's what's happening today. We're not going to have our regular schedule. Everything's not going to be the same. But I'm going to try to stay centered in my faith and trust my community and trust my brothers, trust the wider world of oblates, trust the people, because many oblates have rushed to come get them, to help get them out. They don't have enough vehicles to get them all out at once, and you can't drive a bus on that road. I mean, you might, well, no, you can't. we might lose all the monks if they try that. But the point is, people are, the helpers are showing up. Trust that that will happen. In these floods, I've, of course, been moved by so many people, by the people who, saved 10s, 20s, 30s, so many people. There was one rescuer they think saved over 100 people by himself. Now, he was a trained underwater rescue swimmer. It's his job. But by golly, he got there, and he pulled people out of those rivers, out of those raging waters without being killed. Unlike the director of Camp Mystic who lost his own life trying to save the young girls. So there's a lesson in that. Maybe if you're not ready to swim in those waters, don't do that. Being a good neighbor is also knowing what your role is, what you can do, and how you can be present to others. Not everyone, Nancy, is as good at you at just banging on the door of a neighbor's house. You're an extrovert like me. We do that really easily. Some of our folks, that would be really hard for them. But guess what? Everybody has their own role. And so that's good to know what your role is. You know what yours is. Sally knows that it's caring. Brian knows he can bring snacks. You have more gifts than that, by the way. Snacks are just one of your gifts. But I do appreciate snacks, and they are special in this group. And so many of you are such good neighbors to your immediate neighbors and willing to help. And all of you have been great neighbors within this community. Every single one of you has been a person who bent over backwards to make something work, or to say yes when you didn't feel like it, or to do something you didn't think you could do, but you gave it a try. That's how we change the world. You can maybe fit this on a bumper sticker like Phil Porter said, but you'll spend your whole life figuring it out. It's almost like a koan. How do you love your neighbor as yourself and God too? Well, what it means is committing to love all the way, everywhere, and with everybody. May it be so for each of us this week and always.